Okay, welcome students of KIPP NYC College Prep. This is our video where we introduce Nearpod. Nearpod is a new service that we're using as a school because it gives great presentations and it goes well with both live lessons as well as student self-guided lessons. Today, I'm going to simulate a Nearpod with me as the teacher, and my three students are going to be Ms. Holmes. Ms. Holmes, would you wave? Ms. Nelson Mason, and Mr. Johnson. And we hope that this presentation gets you excited for all the great ways that we are going to teach and learn in 2020, 2021. Okay, so I'm going to start, and when I want to deliver a Nearpod live, I hover over my Nearpod and I click live participation. I launch a new class, and I can share a link to the Nearpod in the chat of my Zoom and a code to the Nearpod in the chat of my Zoom. So once my students click on the link and enter the code, I can see that all of my students are in the Nearpod and we are ready to have our awesome presentation. So welcome students to Nearpod. Nearpod is an awesome service because it basically does all four things that a class can do all in one service. It allows a teacher to give a presentation. It allows a teacher to integrate a video from YouTube or the internet. It allows classes to have worksheet type activities, like when you read a document or where you write answers to questions. And it allows students to interact with each other. So all four of those things are part of Nearpod, and we're going to see all of them in this presentation. Okay, Nearpod works as both a live lesson, or you can do it on your own time. Okay, and this year we're going to be playing with both of those options through your classes. This particular Nearpod is going to be a lesson about Malcolm X. So the aim is that students will be able to explain different reasons why Malcolm X considered violence as a possible course of action for Black protesters during the 60s by reading and discussing a speech of his called The Ballot or the Bullet. Okay, and I'm going to start by inviting my students to participate with something called a collaborate question. So here's my opening question, and I'm going to ask my students to all take a stab at it together.
All right.
Okay, so I'm in Mr. Ruthier's class, and he's asked me to do today's warm-up. My question is, protest today. Over the last few months, protests in America have emerged, and they sometimes become violent. What do you think about the fact that violence has occurred in the American protests since late May? Well, if I look over here where my spotlight is, I'll see that other people have already put in answers, and I can even like their answers to show that I liked what they were thinking. Now, if I were to answer this question, all I would have to do is go down to the section at the bottom where it says share thoughts and or images here. So I can even click this image and I can do a Google search. So if I wanted to find images of today's protest, I would Google search Black Lives Matter protests NYC. Search. Okay. I like this image and I'm going to save it and I'm going to add it to the class by clicking post. So I have one image here to describe what I think I'm talking about. Next, I'm going to add a comment. Well, what do you think about the fact that violence has occurred in American protests since late May? Think. And I just press enter and my answer pops up right here. And my picture popped up over here. Now, I can be cheesy and I can like my own post, or I can come back to it later and see what my classmates chose. All right, thank you.
Okay, class, so we are going to frame what we're doing. We've been talking about the civil rights movement during the 1960s, which is so relevant to our country's current reckoning with our racial injustices. And we've talked about things like protests, things like Martin Luther King and the rise of the Black Panthers. Today, we're going to zoom in on a figure during the civil rights movement named Malcolm X. We're going to zoom in on a speech that he gave. In order to better understand his speech, let's learn a little bit about his life. And we're going to do that by watching a YouTube video. Okay, we are going to watch this video about Malcolm X. And as you watch, I want you to take notes in the Nearpod. And Mr. Johnson is going to narrate how he takes notes in the Nearpod.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ruthier. All right, so one of the things that I love about Nearpod as a student is that I can take notes directly in Nearpod. I don't have to be fumbling with a journal or any other program in order to do that. So in order to get to notes, I'm just going to hit this little drop down that says menu. Click that. I'm going to go all the way down to this middle section that says notes. All right, now when I get here, I have some options. I can either have my notes sent to me via email, have them saved to Google Drive, or saved to OneDrive. Now, since we don't have OneDrive at our school, we're going to focus on the first two options. Now, specifically, I'm going to select Save to Google Drive because that's a really easy thing for me to go access later on. So when I click that, it's going to prompt me to sign in to Google Drive, which is really easy because I'm already signed in on my computer. And there you go. I'm signed in to my Google Drive, and I will be able to see these notes later on saved there. All right, so right now I'm going to start the video that Mr. Ruthier just asked me to watch. I'm going to take notes as I listen. Okay, so I just finished up the video, and I'm going to move on to the next slide. Now you can see here that Mr. Ruthier has made a quiz for me. Now, why Mr. Ruthier made a quiz is so he wants to know that I know exactly what's going on with Malcolm X. It's also a good check for myself before we go into the discussion later on. All right, so let's take a look at our first question. What was Malcolm X's experience like growing up? I have two options here. Now, I can do this just based on memory. Also, I have my notes that I took as I went along and watched the video. Another great reason to use this feature. So I'm going to select that he faced a lot of oppression and racial violence. I'm going to hit next. What was the name of the group that Malcolm X joined after prison? I see here in my notes, Nation of Islam. Select C. Next. How has Malcolm X been most influential even after his assassination? I see here he had a famous autobiography. That means a book about his own life. His speeches and autobiographies have inspired people. Boom. And I can hit submit, and that means I'm done taking this quiz. 100% correct. I can see the correct answers down here as well. And I can move on. And now I have an open-ended question. This means that I can respond at length in a couple sentences so that Mr. Ruthier can see my thinking. In addition, he can share that thinking with other students as well. How does Malcolm X's story relate to the protests going on today? Malcolm X. And there you go. And I can just hit submit. That means I'm done, and Mr. Ruthier will be able to see everything that I just wrote. All right, moving it back to Mr. Ruthier.
Okay, so what we're going to do together is we are going to read this speech called the ballot or the bullet, and you are going to answer questions about it as we read it. It's going to show up in the Nearpod as a Google Doc. So this speech was given on April 3rd, 1964. It was delivered at the Corey Methodist Church in Cleveland, Ohio, to a crowd of 3,000 people of various religions and races. The first thing I want you to think about is when was this made, where was it made, who was it delivered to, and how might that influence the way that it was written.
So already I have a question, and it states, do you think the setting or audience of the speech will affect how Malcolm X talks? Great question. I see that my classmates, Mr. Johnson and Ms. Holmes, have already answered these questions. So I need to find my name and get on the ball and answer it myself. So I do think that this setting and audience is going to affect the speech. In fact, I believe so. I did it.
Okay, and that's Nearpod. You saw how we had a teacher presentation, we integrated a YouTube video, we had worksheet-like activities like a quiz and an open-ended question, and we had students participating, responding to each other, and expressing their ideas. We hope you liked the presentation, and we hope that everybody has a great start to your school year.